The distant wail of a child pierced the dawn like a bullet, cutting through the haze of grief that had settled over the Quinn homestead just outside Walla Walla, Washington Territory, 1878. Jackson Quinn's weathered hands trembled as he tried to button his daughter's dress, his fingers clumsy with tasks that had once been his wife's domain. 4-year-old Emma's face was streaked with tears, her blonde hair a tangled mess that Martha would have never allowed. But Martha was gone, taken by childbed fever 3 weeks prior, leaving Jackson alone with 5 children under the age of 10, and an emptiness so vast it threatened to swallow him whole. "Pa, Tommy won't stop crying and I can't find his blanket," said 8-year-old William, the oldest of the Quinn children, appearing in the doorway with a wailing toddler balanced awkwardly on his hip. Jackson exhaled slowly, fighting the urge to sink to the floor. "Check under the cot in the back room, and tell Sarah to put the porridge on before it burns." The funeral had been small, just the children, Jackson, and a handful of neighbors who'd brought food and sympathetic glances, but little in the way of practical help. Martha had been the heart of their home, the gentle force that kept their world turning. Without her, Jackson felt like a man trying to rope the wind. By mid-morning, Jackson had managed to feed his brood, though 6-year-old Sarah had spilled milk across the floor. 2-year-old Tommy had refused to eat anything but bread. And baby Joseph, barely 3 weeks old, and the unwitting cause of his mother's death, screamed endlessly in hunger despite Jackson's desperate attempts with goat's milk and sugar water. "Mr. Quinn," a voice called from outside, accompanied by a firm knock. Jackson opened the door to find Walter Johnson, owner of the general store in Walla Walla, standing on his porch with a sympathetic expression. "Brought some supplies," Walter said, nodding toward a wagon where his son was unloading packages. "Town took up a collection, figured you could use some help." Jackson's throat tightened. "That's mighty kind." Walter shifted uncomfortably. "There's something else. My wife's cousin just arrived from Boston yesterday. Name's Rebecca Morgan. She's a nurse trained proper at Massachusetts General Hospital. Came west looking for work and a change of scenery after losing her fiancé in the war." Jackson frowned. The war had ended 13 years ago. Reading his expression, Walter clarified, "Not the war between the states. She was engaged to an Army doctor. Apache attacked down in Arizona Territory 3 years back." "I'm sorry to hear it, but what's that got to do with me?" Jackson asked, bouncing the screaming baby awkwardly in his arms. Walter glanced at the chaos visible through the open door, Sarah trying to sweep spilled food while William chased Tommy, who was wearing nothing but a shirt. "She needs work, and from the looks of things, you need help. She's good with children and knows medicine. Might be an arrangement that benefits you both." Jackson's pride bristled. "I can manage my own." Walter's eyes dropped to baby Joseph, whose cries had grown hoarse. "That little one needs a woman's touch, Jackson. And what about the cattle? Your herd won't tend itself come branding time." The truth of Walter's words hit like a physical blow. Jackson had barely slept in weeks, dividing his time between the children and his neglected ranch. Something had to give. "Send her out tomorrow," Jackson said finally. "I can offer room and board plus $5 a month. If she's expecting more than that, she'd best stay in town." Walter nodded. "I'll tell her." After Walter left, Jackson sank into Martha's rocking chair, baby Joseph finally quieting to exhausted whimpers against his chest. Jackson's eyes burned with fatigue and unshed tears. He'd sworn he could do this alone, that he would honor Martha by raising their children as she would have wanted. But the truth was he was drowning. "Pa," William appeared, holding Emma's hand. "Is someone coming to help us?" Jackson nodded, looking into his son's hopeful face. "Yes." A nurse from back east. But just until we get our bearings, you understand. We're Quinns. We take care of our own. William nodded solemnly, though relief shone in his eyes. Jackson felt a pang of guilt. His son had been trying so hard to be the man of the house, sacrificing what little childhood he had left. The next morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect spring day in the Washington Territory. Jackson had been up since before first light, attempting to make the cabin presentable. He'd swept the floors, scrubbed the table, and even managed to get all 5 children dressed in clean clothes. "Remember your manners," he reminded them as they sat at breakfast. "This lady is doing us a kindness by coming to help. She's not your ma and she's not trying to be. But you'll treat her with respect." A wagon appeared on the horizon just as they finished eating. Jackson straightened his shirt and ran a hand through his hair, suddenly aware of his unkempt appearance. It had been weeks since he'd had a proper shave. Walter's wagon pulled up to the house, and Jackson stepped onto the porch, the baby in his arms and the other children lined up beside him like soldiers awaiting inspection. Walter helped his passenger down, and Jackson got his first look at Rebecca Morgan. She wasn't what he'd expected. In his mind, he'd pictured an older woman, stern and practical. But Rebecca Morgan couldn't have been more than 25, with a heart-shaped face framed by auburn hair pulled back in a simple knot. She wore a sensible blue traveling dress and carried a medical bag in one hand and a small trunk in the other. "Mr. Quinn," she said, approaching with a direct gaze that caught him off guard. "I'm Rebecca Morgan. Mr. Johnson explained your situation." Jackson nodded stiffly. "Madam, these are my children. William, Sarah, Emma, Thomas, and the baby is Joseph." Rebecca smiled at the children, her expression warm but not overly familiar. "Hello, everyone. I'm very pleased to meet you." Sarah hid behind Jackson's leg, but William stepped forward and offered his hand like the man he was trying so hard to become. "Are you going to fix baby Joseph, madam? Pa says he won't take to the bottle proper." Rebecca knelt to William's level. "I'm going to try my very best to help with baby Joseph, and with anything else your family needs." Something in her tone, professional yet kind, eased a fraction of the tension in Jackson's shoulders. Perhaps this arrangement wouldn't be the disaster he'd feared. Walter helped carry Rebecca's trunk inside, then departed with a knowing look that Jackson chose to ignore. Left alone with the stranger who was about to enter their lives, Jackson suddenly felt at a loss for words. Rebecca saved him the trouble. "If you don't mind, Mr. Quinn, I'd like to examine the baby first. Then perhaps you could show me around so I can better understand your household." Jackson handed over Joseph, who had started his morning fussing. "He cries most of the time. Martha, my wife, she fed our others till they were walking almost, so I don't rightly know how to manage with the bottle." Rebecca cradled Joseph with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to infants. She checked his color, felt his fontanel, and listened to his breathing before speaking. "He's underweight but not dangerously so. I've had success with a mixture of goat's milk, water, and a bit of molasses for babies who won't take to cow's milk. If you have the ingredients, I'd like to try it." For the first time in weeks, Jackson felt a glimmer of hope. "We've got all that." Rebecca nodded. "Good. And if you have any fennel growing wild, I can make a tea that might help with his stomach discomfort." "I wouldn't know fennel if it sprouted in my boot, madam, but William might. Boy spends half his time with our neighbor Mrs. Fitzgerald, learning about plants and such." William puffed up with importance. "I know fennel, Pa. It grows by the creek where the big rocks are." Rebecca smiled at him. "Then perhaps you can show me later. For now, let's try this new milk mixture for your brother." Jackson watched in amazement as Rebecca prepared the concoction, warming it slightly on the stove before testing it on her wrist. When she offered it to Joseph, The baby initially turned away, but Rebecca persisted with a patience Jackson had long since exhausted. After several attempts, Joseph began to suckle, his tiny fists relaxing against the bottle. "Well, I'll be damned," Jackson muttered, then immediately reddened. "Beg your pardon, madam." Rebecca's lips quirked in a small smile. "I've worked in hospital wards, Mr. Quinn. I've heard far worse than a mild oath." As Joseph continued to feed, Rebecca turned her attention to the other children. She checked each for signs of illness or neglect, though she was tactful enough not to make it obvious to Jackson that's what she was doing. She found Emma's chronic ear infections, Sarah's mild anemia, and the lice that had taken up residence in all the children's hair during the weeks of Jackson's overwhelmed parenting. "I'll need to prepare some treatments," she said matter-of-factly. "And we should wash all the bedding in hot water." "Do you have a copper tub for laundry?" Jackson nodded, feeling a strange mix of embarrassment and relief at her methodical approach. "Out back. Haven't used it proper since. Well, since Martha took ill." Rebecca's expression softened. "Mr. Quinn, I want to be clear. I'm not here to judge how you've managed. You've kept 5 children alive and together during an impossible time. That's no small feat." Her words caught him off guard, piercing the armor of defensiveness he'd worn since Martha's death. For a dangerous moment, Jackson thought he might break down in front of this stranger. He turned away, ostensibly to check the fire. "I'll show you where you'll sleep," he said gruffly when he'd regained his composure. "It's not much, just a small room off the kitchen where Martha used to do the sewing." Rebecca followed him with Joseph still contentedly feeding in her arms. The room was indeed small, with just enough space for a narrow bed, a chest for clothes, and a small table with a basin. But it had a window that looked out onto the rolling hills of the Quinn property, and Rebecca seemed genuinely pleased. "This will be perfectly fine, Mr. Quinn. I don't require much." Jackson lingered awkwardly in the doorway. "I expect you'll want to rest after your journey." Rebecca shook her head. "I'd rather get started if you don't mind. The sooner we address the children's needs, the better everyone will feel." She gestured to Joseph. "He's almost finished his bottle. I think we should prepare baths for all the children and treat their hair for lice. Then I'll see about making a salve for Emma's ears." Jackson stared at her, overwhelmed by her efficiency. "You're the doctor, madam," she smiled slightly. "Nurse, Mr. Quinn, not a doctor, but I was trained by some of the best." The rest of the day passed in a flurry of activity. Rebecca orchestrated a complete overhaul of the Quinn household's hygiene. She supervised as Jackson hauled water for baths, mixed vinegar rinses for the children's hair, and prepared a special salve for Emma's ears from herbs in her medical bag. By evening, all 5 Quinn children were clean, fed, and remarkably calm. As Jackson sat on the porch after supper, watching the sunset paint the rolling wheat fields gold, Rebecca joined him, baby Joseph sleeping peacefully in her arms. "He'll need feeding again in a few hours," she said quietly. "But he's taken well to the new mixture. I think with consistent feeding, he'll begin to thrive." Jackson nodded, overwhelmed with gratitude yet unsure how to express it. "You've done more in one day than I managed in 3 weeks." Rebecca sat in the chair beside him. "You were grieving, Mr. Quinn, and trying to do the impossible alone." "Jackson," he said suddenly, "if you're going to be living here, might as well use my given name." She nodded. "Jackson, then, and I'm Rebecca." A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the last light fade from the sky. For the first time since Martha's death, Jackson felt the crushing weight of responsibility lighten, if only a fraction. "How long was your journey west?" he asked, genuinely curious about the woman who had so competently taken charge of his chaotic household. Rebecca's gaze remained on the horizon. "Nearly a month. I took the train as far as I could, then joined a wagon party for the remainder. It was educational. Jackson detected a wry note in her voice. Not what you expected. The terrain was more beautiful than I imagined. The traveling conditions were worse. She glanced at him. But I don't regret coming. After James died, my fiancée, Boston, felt suffocating. Everyone watching me with pity, waiting to see if I would fade away like a proper grieving almost widow. Jackson understood all too well. Folks mean well, but their kindness can feel like sandpaper on raw skin. Rebecca nodded, surprised by his insight. Exactly. I needed purpose more than pity. When I heard about opportunities for medical professionals in the Western Territories, it seemed like providence. And now you're stuck in a backwater ranch with 5 wild children and a man who can't remember which end of a hairbrush to use, Jackson said with a self-deprecating smile. Rebecca laughed softly, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. These children need care, and I need to be needed, so perhaps it is providence after all. As the stars emerged in the vast Washington sky, Jackson felt something stir within him, not happiness, not yet, but a quiet recognition that perhaps the worst had passed. With Rebecca Morgan's arrival, healing had begun to find its way back to the Quinn homestead. The following weeks established a rhythm to life at the Quinn ranch. Rebecca rose before dawn to prepare breakfast and tend to baby Joseph, who was gaining weight and crying less with each passing day. Jackson handled the outdoor chores and worked with the cattle, while William proudly assisted both adults, eager to prove his usefulness. Rebecca's medical knowledge proved invaluable beyond caring for the baby. She treated the cut on Jackson's hand when he injured himself mending fence, showed Sarah how to identify medicinal plants in the meadows surrounding their property, and even saved one of their most valuable horses when it developed colic during a summer storm. "How did you know to walk him like that?" Jackson asked, watching in amazement as the horse's distress eased under Rebecca's ministrations. Rebecca wiped sweat from her brow, her sleeves rolled up and dress mudded from the stable. One of the doctors I trained with had a passion for veterinary medicine. He believed many of the principles were transferable. Jackson shook his head in wonder. Martha would have just prayed and hoped for the best. We lost 2 good horses that way. As soon as the words left his mouth, Jackson felt a stab of guilt. He rarely spoke of Martha now, and comparing the 2 women seemed a betrayal. Rebecca must have sensed his discomfort. Your wife kept 5 children healthy and a household running in frontier conditions. That's its own kind of medicine. Her voice held no judgment, only respect. Jackson nodded, grateful for her understanding. She was a good woman. The best. I wish I could have known her, Rebecca said simply, giving the horse a final pat before walking back to the house. Jackson watched her go, struck by the grace with which she navigated the complex emotional landscape of their household. Rebecca never tried to replace Martha in the children's affections, yet she provided the maternal care they desperately needed. She respected the memories of the woman who had come before her, while creating her own place in their lives. One evening in late June, after the children were asleep, Jackson found Rebecca on the porch, writing in a small journal by lantern light. "Letters home?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. She shook her head. "Medical observations. I keep notes on treatments and outcomes. It helps me improve my practice." Jackson was impressed by her dedication. "You truly love your work, don't you?" Rebecca closed her journal. "I do. When James died, medicine became my salvation. There's something profound about easing suffering, about making a tangible difference in someone's life. Like you've done for us," Jackson said quietly. In the lantern's glow, he could see a flush rise to her cheeks. "Your family has given me purpose when I needed it most. It's a fair exchange. Jackson wasn't sure when he'd started noticing things like the way the evening light caught the auburn highlights in her hair, or how her eyes crinkled at the corners when she truly smiled. He only knew that somewhere between her arrival and this warm summer night, Rebecca Morgan had become more than the woman who helped with his children. She had become essential to his peace of mind. "The town social is next Saturday," he said suddenly. "Folks from all around Walla Walla gather for dancing and such. I was thinking. That is, if you'd like. The children would enjoy it, I'm sure." Rebecca looked surprised, then pleased. "I haven't danced in years, not since before the hospital." "Neither have I," Jackson admitted. "Might be we're both terrible at it now." Her laugh was like cool water on a hot day. "Then we'll be terrible together. Yes, I think a social would be lovely for all of us." The night of the social arrived clear and mild, with a quarter moon hanging above the rolling hills of Walla Walla Valley. Jackson had spent an uncharacteristic amount of time on his appearance, trimming his beard and polishing his boots, until William teased him about primping like a girl. The children were equally excited, especially Sarah and Emma, who twirled in their best dresses while Rebecca braided ribbons into their hair. Even baby Joseph seemed to sense the festive mood, cooing and reaching for the colorful streamers Rebecca had fashioned from scraps of fabric. "You look mighty fine, Miss Rebecca," Sarah declared as Rebecca emerged in a green dress that Jackson had never seen before, her hair arranged in a more elaborate style than her usual practical knot. "Thank you, Sarah. So do you," Rebecca replied, adjusting the girl's collar. Jackson stood speechless in the doorway, hat in hand, struck by the transformation. It wasn't that Rebecca wasn't always attractive, she was, even covered in dirt from the garden or flour from baking, but tonight she looked like she belonged in a fancy Boston parlor rather than their humble ranch house. "We clean up pretty good, don't we, Pa?" William said, nudging his father with surprising perceptiveness. Jackson cleared his throat. "That we do, son. Everyone ready?" The journey to town was filled with the children's excited chatter. As they approached Walla Walla, they could hear fiddle music drifting from the town square, where lanterns had been strung between trees and tables laden with food lined one side of a makeshift dance floor. "Will we know anyone?" Rebecca asked, suddenly looking nervous. Jackson helped her down from the wagon. "Just about everyone, and they've all been asking about you." "About me?" Word travels in a small town. The Boston nurse who's brought the Quinn family back to life is big news in these parts. Rebecca looked alarmed. "I hope I haven't been the subject of gossip." Jackson offered his arm as they walked toward the gathering. "Nothing but admiration, I assure you, though Walter Johnson's wife has been hinting that you'd make a fine match for her nephew ever since she heard you weren't actually an old spinster." Rebecca's laugh drew looks from several nearby townspeople. "And what did you say to that?" Jackson hadn't intended to share his response, but something in her expectant gaze compelled honesty. "I told her you were particular about who you spent time with, and her nephew didn't seem the type to appreciate a woman of learning and substance." The smile that bloomed on Rebecca's face made his heart skip a beat. "That was very gallant of you, Jackson Quinn." Before he could respond, they were surrounded by curious neighbors. The women immediately whisked Rebecca away, eager to meet the mysterious Eastern nurse, while the men clapped Jackson on the back and commended him on finding help. "She's a looker, Quinn," said Harlan Mitchell, a rancher from the north end of the valley. "Smart thinking getting a pretty one." Jackson bristled. "Miss Morgan is a trained medical professional who's been a godsend to my children. Her appearance has nothing to do with it." Harlan raised his hands in mock surrender. "No offense meant. Just saying you got lucky is all." Jackson moved away, irritated by the implication. Rebecca wasn't some mail-order bride or desperate spinster. She was educated, capable, and had chosen to help his family out of compassion, not necessity. The fact that he found her increasingly attractive was beside the point, and certainly not something he was ready to examine too closely. He found William and Thomas at the refreshment table, already stuffing themselves with pie. Sarah and Emma had joined a circle of children playing a clapping game, their faces alight with joy. And Rebecca stood near the edge of the dance floor, baby Joseph in her arms, watching the dancers with evident delight. As Jackson approached, Joseph reached for his father with a happy gurgle. The baby had thrived under Rebecca's care, now plump and good-natured where he had once been frail and colicky. "He's enjoying the music," Rebecca said, transferring Joseph to Jackson's arms. "I think he has a natural sense of rhythm." Jackson bounced his son gently. "Takes after his mother." Martha loved to dance. A shadow crossed Rebecca's face, quickly replaced by a polite smile. "Would you like me to take him back so you can dance? I'm sure many of the ladies would welcome a turn around the floor with you." Jackson shook his head. "I came here to dance with you, Rebecca." "That is, if you're willing." Her eyes widened slightly. "What about Joseph? Mrs. Fitzgerald has been making eyes at him since we arrived. She'd be delighted to hold him for a dance or two." After settling Joseph with the elderly neighbor who had indeed been hovering nearby, Jackson led Rebecca to the edge of the dance floor just as the fiddle struck up a lively reel. He hadn't danced since before Martha fell ill, and for a moment he hesitated, uncertain. Rebecca sensed his unease. "I'll follow your lead," she said, placing her hand in his. The touch of her fingers against his palm sent an unexpected warmth up his arm. As they joined the line of dancers, Jackson felt a strange combination of guilt and anticipation. Martha had been gone just over 2 months, and here he was, heart racing at the touch of another woman's hand. But as they moved through the steps of the dance, something shifted. Rebecca's face was flushed with joy, her eyes bright as she followed his lead, and Jackson found himself smiling, truly smiling for the first time in months. This wasn't a betrayal of Martha, he realized. It was a step toward healing, toward the future she would have wanted for him and their children. The evening passed in a blur of music and laughter. Jackson danced with Rebecca twice more, then watched proudly as William asked her for a dance, the boy's serious face determined to remember the steps Jackson had taught him. Even little Emma had her moment, standing on Jackson's boots as he waltzed her around the edge of the floor. As the celebration wound down, Jackson gathered his tired but happy family for the ride home. The younger children fell asleep almost immediately, lulled by the wagon's gentle motion and the excitement of the evening. "They needed this," Rebecca said softly, Joseph sleeping against her shoulder. "Children are remarkably resilient, but they need joy as much as they need food and medicine." Jackson nodded, watching the moonlight play across the familiar landscape. "We all did. I've been so focused on survival, on just getting through each day, I forgot there was more to life." Rebecca was silent for a moment. "It's not wrong to find happiness again, Jackson. It doesn't diminish what you had before." Her words hit with uncanny precision, as though she'd read his innermost thoughts. "Is that what you did after your fiancé died? Found happiness in your work, in a way," she admitted. "Though I think I was running as much as healing. Coming here to your family. It's the first time since James died that I've felt truly present, truly needed for who I am, not just what I can do." The honesty of her confession moved him deeply. Without thinking, Jackson reached across the sleeping children and took her hand. "You are needed, Rebecca. Not just for your skills, though God knows we'd be lost without them, but for yourself. In the darkness of the wagon, her fingers tightened around his, a wordless acknowledgment of what remained unsaid between them. Summer gave way to autumn, bringing with it golden wheat fields and crisp mornings that painted the Walla Walla Valley in shades of amber and russet. Life at the Quinn ranch had fallen into comfortable rhythms, with Rebecca fully integrated into their daily existence. No longer just a nurse helping a family in crisis, she had become essential to their happiness as well as their health. Jackson found himself inventing reasons to be near the house during the day, taking on repairs he'd postponed for years just to hear her singing to the children, or to share a cup of coffee with her during a quiet moment. Their evening conversations on the porch had become the highlight of his days, a time when they could speak freely after the children were asleep. It was during one such conversation in late September that Jackson finally found the courage to address what had been growing between them. "The children adore you," he said as they sat side by side, watching the stars emerge. "William told me yesterday that he wants to be a doctor now, thanks to you." Rebecca smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "They're wonderful children. It's been a privilege to be part of their lives these past months." Something in her tone caught Jackson's attention. "You speak as if you're leaving." Rebecca stared into the darkness. "My agreement with you was for temporary help, Jackson. Joseph is thriving now and the other children are healthy. You've managed to keep up with both them and the ranch. Perhaps it's time I continued on to my original destination." Jackson felt as though the ground had opened beneath him. "Where would you go?" "There's a hospital in Seattle that expressed interest in my services before I stopped here. I received a letter from them last week, asking if I was still considering the position." "And are you?" Jackson asked, his voice tight. Rebecca turned to face him, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether there's a reason for me to stay." The question hung between them, charged with unspoken emotion. Jackson had been a husband for 10 years, had fathered 5 children, yet he felt as nervous as a schoolboy facing his first sweetheart. "I can pay you more," he said, immediately regretting the words as soon as they left his mouth. Rebecca's soft laugh held a note of disappointment. "That's not the reason I was hoping for, Jackson." He stood abruptly, moving to the porch railing with his back to her. "I know. I'm sorry. I'm not good at this, Rebecca. When I courted Martha, we were both 18 and had known each other since childhood." There was no moment of declaration, just a natural progression that everyone expected. He heard her rise and move to stand beside him. "And this isn't expected." "No," he admitted. "When Martha died, I thought that part of my life was over. That I'd raise the children alone and that would be enough. I never imagined." "Neither did I," Rebecca said softly. "When James died, I locked that part of myself away, focused on my work, told myself it was enough." Jackson turned to face her. "Is it enough?" In the silvery moonlight, her eyes shone with unshed tears. "No, not anymore." With a gentleness that belied his calloused hands, Jackson reached up to cup her face. "Stay, Rebecca, not as our nurse but as more. I can't promise it will be easy. I'm still learning how to live without Martha, and the children need stability and love," Rebecca interrupted. "I can give them both, if you'll let me." "And what do you need?" Jackson asked, his thumb brushing a tear from her cheek. Rebecca leaned into his touch. "A home, purpose, and someone who sees me for who I am, not just what I can offer." "I see you," Jackson whispered, drawing her closer. "I've been seeing you more clearly every day since you arrived." When their lips met, it felt like coming home after a long journey. There was none of the guilt or confusion Jackson had feared, only a profound sense of rightness, as if the universe had conspired to bring them together through their separate griefs. As they stood entwined on the porch of the home they now truly shared, Jackson made a silent promise to Martha, wherever she was. He would always honor her memory, would ensure their children never forgot the woman who had given them life. But he would also embrace this unexpected second chance at happiness, this healing that had come to them all through Rebecca's capable, loving hands. The following morning, Jackson gathered the children after breakfast. They sat around the table, curious about their father's solemn expression. Rebecca stood nervously by the stove, unsure of her place in this family meeting. "I have something important to ask all of you," Jackson began. "As you know, Miss Rebecca came here to help us when we needed it most. She's cared for baby Joseph, helped you with your schooling, and made our house a home again." The children nodded, with William watching his father intently, seeming to guess what was coming. "Last night, I asked Miss Rebecca if she would consider staying with us permanently, not as our nurse, but as my wife and your mother." A moment of silence followed, broken by Sarah's excited question. "Would you be our new ma for real?" Rebecca moved to stand beside Jackson, her heart in her throat. "I would never try to replace your mother," she said carefully. "No one could do that, but I would love to be a mother to you if you'll have me." William stood up, his young face serious. "Did you say yes?" Rebecca exchanged a glance with Jackson. "I told your father I needed to be sure all of you were comfortable with the idea before I gave my final answer." William looked at his siblings, then back at Rebecca. "Ma would have liked you. She always said family was the most important thing, and you've helped keep ours together." He stepped forward and offered his hand solemnly. "I think you should stay." Rebecca knelt and pulled him into a hug instead of taking his hand. "Thank you, William. That means everything to me." The other children crowded around, with Emma declaring she wanted to help plan the wedding and Thomas asking if this meant Rebecca would make her special honey cakes more often. Baby Joseph, secure in Sarah's arms, reached for Rebecca with a happy gurgle. Jackson watched the scene with a full heart, marveling at how life could change so completely in such a short time. 3 months ago, he'd been a broken man drowning in grief and responsibility. Now, surrounded by the joyful chaos of his family, his complete family, he felt hope blooming anew. The wedding took place on a crisp October afternoon, with the fall colors painting a spectacular backdrop against the rolling hills surrounding Walla Walla. The entire community turned out for the occasion. The same neighbors who had brought food after Martha's death now bringing gifts and well wishes for the new beginning. Rebecca wore a simple ivory dress that she and Sarah had worked on together, with Emma's carefully embroidered handkerchief tucked into her sleeve. William stood proudly beside his father, wearing his Sunday best and holding the rings with solemn importance. Thomas and Sarah sat in the front row with baby Joseph, who remained miraculously quiet throughout the ceremony, as if understanding the significance of the moment. As Jackson and Rebecca exchanged vows under the ancient oak tree in the churchyard, their words carried the weight of two people who had known profound loss and found unexpected joy. They promised not just love and fidelity, but understanding, patience, and partnership in raising the children who had brought them together. "I never thought I'd stand here again," Jackson said, his voice steady despite the emotion shining in his eyes. "When I lost Martha, I thought I'd lost my chance at happiness. But you came to us when we needed you most, and in healing my family, you healed my heart as well. I promise to honor that gift every day of our lives together." Rebecca's smile trembled as she responded. "When I came west, I was running from grief, seeking purpose in work alone. What I found instead was a family to love and a man who sees me completely. I promise to cherish the trust you've placed in me, both as your wife and as a mother to your children." As they sealed their vows with a kiss, cheers erupted from the gathered community. The celebration that followed at the Quinn Ranch lasted well into the evening, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed half the territory. Late that night, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Jackson and Rebecca stood on the porch where they had shared so many conversations. "Mrs. Quinn," Jackson said softly, drawing her into his arms, "how does it sound?" Rebecca leaned her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Like coming home," Jackson pressed a kiss to her forehead. "That's exactly what you've given us, Rebecca, a sense of home again, of wholeness." As they stood together under the vast starry sky, Rebecca thought about the winding path that had led her to this moment, the loss that had sent her fleeing Boston, the chance encounter in Walla Walla, the 5 children who had claimed her heart, and the man who had helped her find purpose beyond her profession. "It's strange," she murmured. "I came here to heal your family, but in many ways you've healed me too." Jackson's arms tightened around her. "Then we're even." But they both knew it was more than an even exchange. It was a miracle of timing and circumstance, of 2 broken people finding wholeness together, of a family rebuilt through love and patience. In the years that followed, the Quinn Ranch thrived under their joint care. Rebecca never fully abandoned her medical practice, becoming known throughout the valley for her healing skills. Local women sought her assistance with difficult births. Farmers came to her with injuries too minor for the town doctor, and her knowledge of herbal remedies supplemented the limited medicines available on the frontier. Jackson expanded their cattle operation, using some of Rebecca's inheritance from her parents to purchase additional land and better breeding stock. William, under Rebecca's encouragement, eventually left for medical school in San Francisco, returning years later to establish the first proper hospital in Walla Walla, fulfilling the dream that had been born watching Rebecca tend to his siblings. Sarah discovered a talent for teaching and took over the education of not only her brothers and sisters, but eventually many of the neighboring children as well. Emma developed her mother's eye for beauty, becoming an accomplished artist whose paintings of the Washington Territory landscapes gained recognition even in Eastern galleries. Thomas, always the most adventurous, joined the cavalry for a time before returning to help his father with the ranch. And baby Joseph, who had nearly slipped away in those early weeks, grew into a strong, thoughtful young man with his mother's compassion and his father's steadiness. 2 years after their wedding, Rebecca gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named James and Martha, honoring the loved ones who had gone before. The Quinn family was complete, a testament to resilience and the healing power of love. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jackson surprised Rebecca with a new addition to their home, a proper medical office attached to the ranch house, with shelves for her growing collection of medical texts and remedies, and a separate entrance so patients could come and go without disrupting family life. "You've never stopped healing others," he told her as he showed her the finished space. "I wanted you to have a place worthy of your gifts." Rebecca, moved beyond words, ran her hands over the smooth wooden examination table and the glass-fronted cabinets. "It's perfect, Jackson. But you know I would have continued working from the kitchen table if necessary." He laughed, drawing her into his arms. "I know, but you deserve better than making do. You always have." That evening, as their extended family gathered to celebrate the older children, now adults with lives of their own beginning, the twins racing around with their cousins, neighbors and friends filling the yard with laughter, Rebecca found a quiet moment to stand on the porch where it had all begun. Jackson joined her, slipping his arm around her waist with the easy familiarity of a decade's partnership. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Quinn." Rebecca leaned against him, watching the sunset paint the Walla Walla Valley in gold. "I was just thinking about journeys. How sometimes the detours turn out to be the destination." Jackson nodded, understanding as he always did. "When Walter Johnson suggested bringing a nurse from Boston to help with my wild brood, I thought it would be temporary. A few weeks of assistance until I could manage on my own. And here we are, 10 years later," Rebecca said, turning in his arms to face him. The years had added a few silver strands to his hair and deepened the laugh lines around his eyes, but he was still the same steady, honorable man she had fallen in love with that summer long ago. "Here we are," he agreed, touching his forehead to hers. "The best detour I ever took." As twilight descended on the Quinn ranch, a home rebuilt from grief through patience, understanding, and love, Rebecca thought of the frightened young widow who had arrived in Walla Walla carrying her medical bag and her broken heart. How little that woman had known about the healing that awaited her own spirit in the act of healing others. "I love you, Jackson Quinn," she whispered, the words as true now as the first time she'd spoken them. "And I love you, Rebecca Quinn," he replied, "every day more than the last." Behind them, the door burst open as the twins came looking for their parents, followed by the rest of their boisterous, blended family. As Jackson and Rebecca turned to embrace them all, they exchanged a look of perfect understanding. This beautiful chaos was the life they had built together, the legacy that would endure long after they were gone. From tragedy had come triumph. From loss had come love. And in the healing of one broken family, they had all found wholeness they never expected. In the history of Walla Walla, Washington Territory, there would be many tales of pioneer courage and frontier resilience. But few would match the story of Jackson Quinn and the Boston nurse who came with healing in her hands, not just for his children, but for his heart as well.